what could happen in 2020. Thank you for being with me today. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. Here's Dana.
Fox News alert on growing drama in the Mueller investigation. The president's former attorney making a surprise appearance in federal court, pleading guilty to a new charge. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino. This is the Daily Briefing. Michael Cohen admitting he lied to Congress about work he did on a Trump real estate deal in Russia. The president reacting to the news before leaving for the G20 summit in Argentina, calling Cohen a liar. On Twitter, the president also canceled his planned meeting with Vladimir Putin in Buenos Aires, citing the crisis in Ukraine. We have Fox team coverage. Doug McKelway, he's at the White House, but we begin with Catherine Herridge with more on the case. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Dana. Earlier today, we obtained a draft that was prepared by Cohen's attorneys for Congress in 2017. And that draft is at the heart of Cohen's guilty plea today, lying to Congress about the Moscow real estate proposal. Now, based on the new timeline provided by Cohen, the negotiations with Moscow continued well into the presidential campaign and during the same month of the controversial June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Russian officials. Cohen told Congress, quote, the proposal was under consideration at the Trump Organization from September 2015 until the end of January 2016. They told the New York court this morning that it lasted another 5 months. Cohen also told Congress, quote, I never considered asking Mr. Trump to travel to Russia in connection with this proposal. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Trump was never in contact with anyone about this proposal other than me on 2 occasions. But Cohen told the court earlier today the discussions were more extensive. Earlier today on Capitol Hill, the chairman and ranking Democrat of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who really matter here because it was their committee that got the original testimony from Cohen, responded to the plea.
There seems to be a trend here amongst so many of the president's closest allies that they don't tell the truth.
I haven't seen the specific indictment or the plea, but this is a reason people shouldn't lie when they're in front of a congressional investigation.
Critics of the Mueller probe say the Cohen plea is yet another example of what they call a process crime, and it's not evidence of coordination with Russian officials. But congressional Democrats are already saying that they're going to renew their investigation of Cohen in light of these new revelations. Dana.
All right, Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now to the White House and Doug McKelway with reaction from President Trump. Doug.
Good afternoon, Dana. We had expected a relatively slow day here at the White House, what with the president leaving for the G20 summit early this morning, but it turned out to be anything but that with the Michael Cohen plea deal. That when the president came out to talk to reporters, he didn't even bother to wait for any questions to be posed his way. Instead, he launched into an explanation that it was his right as a businessman to negotiate a hotel deal in Moscow because there was no guarantee that he would win the election. Recall that most people thought he would lose the election. He called his former trusted lawyer Cohen weak, a liar, and not very smart. When asked then why was he your lawyer, Mr. Trump said that Cohen had done him a favor many years ago, and then he said this about the Cohen plea deal.
Even if he was right, it doesn't matter, because I was allowed to do whatever I wanted during the campaign. I was running my business, a lot of different things during the campaign. So very simply, Michael Cohen is lying, and he's trying to get a reduced sentence for things that have nothing to do with me.
The president also told reporters that he would be briefed aboard Air Force One about the latest with the Russia-Ukrainian deal, conflict in the eastern part of Europe, which has raised tensions in that part of the world so much. And that no sooner had Air Force One been airborne when the president tweeted about that situation, quote, based on the facts that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I have decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Vladimir Putin. I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as this situation is resolved. And then shortly after that, the White House press office, again sending a message from Air Force One, said that there were more cancellations in store, announcing saying that meetings with Turkey and South Korea were also canceled. Trump instead, they said, would speak informally with leaders at G20. What's left, it appears, at least among the high-level meetings, is the Saturday night dinner meeting with President Xi of China. But now we have also learned that Peter Navarro, the hardline trade advisor, who is the author of the book Death by China, Confronting the Dragon, A Global Call for Action, will be in the delegation attending the dinner with President Xi. The bottom line is the Chinese simply do not like Mr. Navarro and what he stands for, which is to contain China. That, coupled with a new Reuters report that came out just this morning, that the U.S. government plans to more closely screen Chinese students who attend U.S. universities for the potential for spying, is casting a little bit of a pall on the prospects for any kind of a trade deal with China. It doesn't mean it's dead yet, Dana, but certainly casting a bit of a dark shadow on the prospects for a trade deal.
And we have Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group. He'll be here later on to talk to us about all of that. Thank you, Doug. Now let's bring in Jim Trusty, former DOJ prosecutor. So it's good to have you here today because, Trusty, I need you to explain what a false statement conviction really means.
Well, look, a false statement conviction, it's a serious federal crime. It kind of makes sense intuitively that you don't want people to lie to federal officials that are interviewing them about material important things. It is a felony. It has the potential for jail. I think it's 5 years, if I remember correctly. But it's also, it is fair to call it a process crime. It's a situation where witnesses are not giving up the substance of what the investigation is actually focusing on, but instead tripping up on dishonesty. So it's not a great moment for the Mueller investigation to keep racking up false statement charges or maybe even convictions, because it's really getting further away from the core mission.
Well, true, but what do you think that, I mean, there seems to be a lot of lying going on.
Right. I mean, look, I think it's interesting to figure out when their discretion to charge this takes place. But the bottom line is, if you accept that these are actual provable instances, which certainly in Mr. Flynn's case he's pled, now Mr. Cohen has pled to a false statement charge. I think others have as well. You know, exactly. Then you get to a situation where you say, you know, even if it's not conspiratorial, man, you got a lot of people that are having a real hard time telling the truth, and and that certainly stokes the investigative engine in a way as well.
Let me read to you from the Washington Post today. It was said, Cohen's new plea deal may only be the tip of the iceberg. And then Paul Waldman writes, Cohen is now admitting that he lied to Congress about some key matters involving his former boss. But the really important part isn't what's in the documents that have been released today. It's what isn't in them. Is he right about that?
Well, I'm not sure what he's referring to exactly, but let me put it to you this way. You know, if you have a cooperating witness who is an attorney who originally said, I'm going to take a bullet for my client, has now betrayed the client, will admit various felonies, including a false statement charge, which goes directly to his credibility. I mean, this is not a guy that you can build a case around. You can maybe build a report around him in part, but you better have an awful lot of corroboration if you're ever thinking about putting Mr. Cohen on a witness stand, because any defense attorney is going to have a heyday with him.
Then could we also talk about Paul Manafort, because that news was happened on Tuesday where the plea agreement broke down. What happens in a situation like that?
Well, it's an interesting process. You know, we hear that there's a breach, that the government's saying that he's broken the contract. And that's exactly how it works. It's like a contract. He's agreed to certain things, like cooperating fully and honestly, and they've agreed to certain things, concessions about his sentencing or his lack of further exposure. When you breach it, if you are proven to have breached the contract to a judge by a preponderance of the evidence, then the defendant loses all the good stuff but keeps the bad stuff. He still has been found guilty. He still pled guilty. He can't go back to square one. But the government no longer has any obligation to do anything. So they can basically try to bury him under the prison and max him out on his charges because he's in breach. But they have to prove it up to a judge by a preponderance, not by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that makes for interesting hearings to see what the substance of those false statements are.
Then can you explain also the joint defense agreement and how that should have supposedly ended when Manafort entered his plea?
Yeah, I mean, typically, and these are all, it's another kind of contract. These are all unique in their own ways, but typically a joint defense agreement basically means a whole bunch of attorneys representing a bunch of clients that are in the same investigative probe have the protection of attorney-client privilege so they can speak freely. They want to get together and say, what's going on? Where's the prosecution going? What have they done recently? What's the investigator saying to your guy? If you are, if you find that your client's interests have become adverse to the rest of the team, normally you have to withdraw from the joint defense agreement because you're now on Team America, not on Team Defense. So it's a little unusual to hear about continued conversation between Manafort's attorneys and other people in the joint defense agreement because they have adverse interests now.
And as a former prosecutor, I would imagine that if you were in those shoes, you wouldn't be happy about that.
No, I would be thinking, what in the world is going on here? Because at least from my experience, they shouldn't be chit-chatting. Now, to their mild defense, if it's a very notorious, conspicuous case where everything's getting reported, maybe they feel like they can still have some conversation without really implicating privilege. But it's a dicey area.
All right, James Trusty, our trusty lawyer, thanks for being here today.
All right, see you, Dana.
President Trump's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, it's off. More details on what to expect at the G20 summit amid the growing Ukrainian-Russia crisis. Plus, as of this moment, Trump plans to meet with China's president. Will there be a truce in the trade wars?
I think we're very close to doing something with China, but I don't know that I want to do it because what we have right now is billions and billions of dollars coming into the United States in the form of tariffs.
Plus, every story, every 15 minutes. Fox News headlines 24/7 at Channel 115.
Fox News Alert, President Trump right now heading to the G20 summit in Argentina. Earlier today, he canceled his planned meeting with Vladimir Putin there. On Twitter, the president blamed the cancellation on the crisis in Ukraine, this coming only hours after his former attorney, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to lying to Congress. Joining me now is Ian Bremmer, president and founder of the Eurasia Group. So much to get to. I'm glad you're here because we have a lot to talk about. Let me first play for you some sound from the defense secretary about the crisis in Ukraine with Russia.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I think cavalier force that injured Ukrainian sailors. It was contempt, really, for the traditional ways of settling these kinds of concerns. If they had any, it just shows that Russia cannot be counted on right now to keep its word.
So the meeting was on, then it was off, and now it was going to be on again, and now it is definitely going to be off. The president is not going to meet with Putin. Is that good news for Ukraine?
No, not really. Ukraine's in a tough position right now. There will be talk and support and probably additional directed sanctions, targeted sanctions against individuals and maybe companies, but nothing that's really going to force the Russians off of the dime here. The real problem is that Ukraine's president has 8% approval ratings and their presidential elections coming up at the end of March, which he will lose. And so he is under much more pressure to escalate himself, or it's the end of his tenure in Ukraine.
And the Russians have said that that the Ukrainians provoked the situation because of these low approval ratings. Is there any merit to that?
Yeah, no one buys that. Secretary Mattis doesn't buy that. Donald Trump, I mean, though he's said it's both sides, he's also made clear that this is an unacceptable situation. The Russians here are engaging in a power play to squeeze the Ukrainians from the Sea of Azov, where almost 50% of all of their exports go out. So this is enormously problematic for Ukraine. But as we saw when Russia actually took Crimea and a significant piece of southeast Ukraine, the West, Ukraine is not a NATO member, and the West ultimately doesn't have a lot of interest in really promoting these guys.
Will anything happen at the G20 in regards to Ukraine?
I would be very surprised if Trump and Putin don't meet at least informally. You'll remember you and I discussed the G20 in Hamburg a year ago that they, of course, spent almost an hour together at the dinner. They do get along. Trump actually gets along with a number of leaders at this G20. It's going to be by far the friendliest international summit to him, in part because of where the world has been going. A lot more nationalist leaders.
Does that include with China? We have a chart here from your group about just the enormous amount of trade that China and the United States do around the world. China there in red, the United States in blue. The president both saying that he's going to be real tough on them, but that he might be willing to deal. Is it important for China to try to get a deal with the president? Who needs this more?
It's more important to the Chinese than it is to the Americans, because the Chinese will be hurt a lot more if those tariffs continue to escalate against them. They're a smaller economy. They're more vulnerable to the Americans in that regard. The Chinese are coming to this meeting with an intention to try to get some kind of deal done, something that would be a statement statement of principles. Nothing specific, but close to what the Americans and the North Koreans signed in Singapore that would allow everyone to take a collective breath and step back from continued escalation.
And then you have clear goals from the leadership, and then staff can then work towards those goals to try to get to a deal.
That's the hope. And there's certainly a possibility of that happening. The meeting has been set up with a long dinner and a private bilateral. It's been set up to be successful. But as you know, Peter Navarro, who's a hardliner on China, has just been re-invited to that meeting. The Chinese aren't going to like that. Vice President Pence, when he was in Papua New Guinea, sent there, I guess, for bad behavior a couple weeks ago, very far away, but gave a very strong statement against China. Trump is the kind of guy that will want to pull a rabbit out of its hat, want to show that only he and Xi Jinping, they're the only adults that could actually get something done. So that's a possibility. But as you know, he's just gotten maximally distracted by a lot of investigation-related news here in the U.S., and that's going to affect his mood.
But also at the G20, it's not the G7, right? This is the G20, so it's much expanded. And Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince MBS will be there. Is he the pariah that everyone sort of has to kind of walk around?
Not everyone. The Chinese don't have a problem with him. The Russians don't have a problem with him. The French president actually has responded in a softer way.
But what about the Turkish president, Erdogan?
Well, no, but that's a geopolitical issue that doesn't have to do. I mean, the Turks are very good at killing journalists as well. The Saudis don't have a monopoly on that. Let's keep in mind that the issue of the Khashoggi murder, which is obviously one that no one should find remotely acceptable in an ally or in an enemy for that matter, has been radically outplayed because it's about the media and because about someone in particular that folks in the media really have an attachment to. So it's about them. There are lots of reasons to have problems with Saudi Arabia in terms of what they're doing in the region, like Yemen, like Qatar, like Lebanon. There are also lots of reasons to like Mohammed bin Salman because of what he was trying to accomplish domestically. All of those things are going to change now.
It's complex. My last question for you. Are you pro G20 or not? Like, this is a meeting that's relatively new in geopolitical circles, right? It's been 10 years old or something. Do you like it, or do you think it's too big for your purposes?
As someone who coined the term G0, where I mean, I'm constitutionally forbidden for saying that I really like the G20. But look, anytime you get leaders together in the world, you want them to engage. That's good. Let's keep in mind that this group of leaders has extremely little in common. And that's increasingly true over time. It's making it much harder.
And that's what you mean by the G0 world. Everyone should follow Ian Bremmer on Twitter. Got to check out G0 World.
Thank you, Dana.
Signal, the newsletter. I love it. Thanks, Ian Bremmer. We appreciate it.
See you soon.
So, how will the Trump administration handle the Michael Cohen news here in the United States from Argentina and the G20 summit? Karl Rove will tell us. So here's my rule of thumb as a former White House press secretary. Every time a president goes overseas, some kind of crisis breaks out back home. Let's bring in Karl Rove, former White House deputy chief of staff and a Fox News contributor. Of course, he's no stranger to my rule of thumb. It seems to happen all the time, but that's what busy White Houses have to deal with, Karl. So today, Michael Cohen pleads guilty. The president calling him a liar just before he got on Marine One to head to Air Force One, where he's going to the G20 summit. How do you think the White House can best keep the trains moving on time for all the different things that a White House has to deal with?
Well, have the president focus his public comments and on the G20 and the issues surrounding it, and let somebody else be the voice of the president on this investigation. I think this should have been started a long time ago. I think the president would have been better served by it. I think Trey Gowdy had it right months ago when he advised Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, if your client is innocent, let him act innocent, and that means keep him out of the conversation here.
Take a listen to Alan Dershowitz. He said something that I wanted to get your take on about the White House being prepared to issue some sort of counter narrative after Mueller wraps up. Watch.
It's a prosecutorial report. It will not show balance. Anybody who expects balance, fairness, nuance is looking at the wrong kind of document. You can't have balance when you haven't heard the other side of the story, when you've only tried to put together a prosecutorial case. And that's why it's essential that the president's team be permitted to issue their own report at the same time the Mueller report is issued.
What do you think about that idea, Karl?
I think it's absolutely right. The president ought to be able to make his case at the same time, and to do so in a thoughtful, constructive fulsome way, if you will. What I worry about is right now the White House counsel Don McGahn has left. His temporary replacement is Emmett Flood, whom you and I both know from our time in the White House. Very smart, very top-flight lawyer. The problem is that the White House counsel's office is about half the size that it ought to be, about 20-some-odd people when it should be 40 or 50 people. And preparing that kind of report, and Emmett's a very able guy and capable of very intense work, but that requires some assistance. And lots of things now are going to be pulling at him. As you and I both know, the White House counsel's office plays a role that most people don't understand, and it is one of the most power-packed and demanding places inside the West Wing.
Well, because, Carl, if you could just expand on that a little bit for the last question, which is, it's not just that there's a Mueller investigation, it's that the Democrats have already said that they want to investigate a lot of different things, and so that's another reason to maybe even, I think the Bush White House, we doubled the size of the counsel's office.
Yeah, well, after the Democrats took control in 2006, you're absolutely right. The size of the White House counsel's office doubled, and then we found out we hadn't hired enough lawyers. And my suspicion is that with 20-some-odd lawyers today and about ready to get a new general counsel, it's going to be very problematic for them to be ready on January 3rd to handle the onslaught that is coming their way. And again, I have the greatest respect for Emmett Flood. He's terrific, but you need to have a lot of really smart people in that office, and numbers matter when they face the kind of onslaught they're going to be facing in January from the Democrats.
All right, Karl Rove, we love having you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This is not a good development. Somebody conceding that they lied to Congress.
Lawmakers reacting to today's guilty plea from Michael. Bombshell development in the Russia investigation. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen making a surprise appearance in federal court, entering a new plea deal with special counsel Robert Mueller, admitting he lied to Congress. Fox team coverage, Rick Leventhal outside the courthouse in Manhattan. But let's begin with chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel with reaction on Capitol Hill. Mike?
Dana, good afternoon. Some Democrats say this is a sign that special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is heating up.
Yeah, it certainly does because of Cohen's relationship with the president, but exactly what the lies were, and I guess that will come out when the plea is made. So, but it definitely feels like there's an accelerating pace now.
A key Intelligence Committee Republican says this proves the value of the work being done by Robert Mueller and his team.
That's obviously of great concern to me, and I'm very glad that the special counsel is pursuing those who mislead members of Congress. The Intelligence Committee has conducted numerous interviews of witnesses and made referrals where appropriate.
Some Democrats have pounced on the president's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, admitting he lied and are drawing their own conclusions.
This Cohen guilty plea is another piece in the mosaic that could really provide a deeper insight into the full picture of the president's liability here, criminal culpability and conspiracy involving Michael Cohen have always been front and center.
This comes as a number of lawmakers from both parties want to pass a bill basically making sure that special counsel Mueller can complete his work.
Our job here should be to protect Robert Mueller so that he can do his job, and he can do his job not for him, but for the American people.
No surprise, members of both parties say there must be consequences if you lie to Congress. Dana?
Thank you, Mike. Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to other charges just a few months back, and Rick Leventhal has more on that from the U.S. District Court in New York City, where Cohen made his appearance earlier today. Rick, you were back at the courthouse this morning.
Yeah, and Dana, our producer, was in the courtroom this morning and said Cohen looked pretty relaxed, smiling and waving at people that he recognized in the courtroom, including our producer, who was sitting in the jury box because the room was packed. So he seemed relaxed today. We also saw him back in August at another federal courthouse right around the corner when he pled guilty to bank and tax fraud charges related to a taxi business he owned, and also campaign finance violations for his help in orchestrating payments to two women, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, who alleged that they had affairs with then businessman Trump years earlier and could have caused problems during the campaign. Cohen testified back in August that those payments were made, quote, in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office for the principal purpose of influencing the election. Cohen faces sentencing on those charges 2 weeks from now. Today's plea is totally separate and based on charges stemming from some 70 hours of interviews with members of Mueller's team, the special counsel's office. And this morning, Dana, we were tipped off to this particular court appearance being told that it was simply USA versus John Doe. Well, John Doe turned out to be Michael Cohen, and he told the court that he lied to a Senate and House committee to protect his former boss. Quote, I continued to follow the political messaging of individual one, who is Donald Trump, and his advisors. Cohen told the court, I asserted all efforts regarding the Moscow project ceased in January 2016, when in fact they kept going until June of 2016. Cohen also told the judge, I said I never contemplated travel or spoke to individual one, again, that's referring to President Trump, regarding travel, but I did. And Cohen did not answer questions on his way out of the court this morning. His attorney said Cohen has cooperated and will continue to cooperate. And his sentencing on this charge today, Dana, could be wrapped into the sentencing for those other charges. Again, a couple of weeks from now, and we're told he faces several years in prison on all of the charges. So he could do some serious time.
All right, Rick, thank you so much.
Everybody in the world who was in news or political operations after July 22nd, when Assange, 2016, when Assange dumped all these emails on Debbie Wasserman Schultz, said he had more, everybody wanted to know what they were.
You wanted them out, though, to help the Trump campaign.
Absolutely.
That was Jerome Corsi, an associate of Roger Stone, saying last night he tried to get in touch with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to find out the contents of DNC emails hacked by the Russians in hopes of using it against the Hillary Clinton campaign. Fox News senior judicial analyst Andrew Napolitano saying Robert Mueller's theory on collusion is starting to come into focus.
Well, the roadmap appears to run through Jerry Corsi and perhaps through Roger Stone, and through the Julian Assange, and perhaps through the president of Ecuador, and perhaps through Paul Manafort, in an effort to, this is Bob Mueller's theory now, not mine, show a circuitous route of communication between Russian hackers getting into the DNC and the Hillary campaign computers and delivering that information to the public.
I'm joined now by Doug Burns. He's a former federal prosecutor, and so good to have you here for your expertise. There's just one other character that I want to bring into this, and that's Felix Sater.
Yes.
This quote is coming back. This is from a New York Times report in August of 2017, where Felix Sater sends an email to Michael Cohen, in which he says, our boy, meaning President Trump, can become president of the USA, and we can engineer it. I will get all of Putin's team to buy in on this. I will manage this process. But tell me a little bit about Felix Sater.
Well, that's pretty powerful, but Felix Sater's got a little bit of a checkered past. If you look at his background and his history, he's had some situations, legal problems, was indicted, and so forth. But again, as working off what Judge Napolitano was saying, I mean, I personally, Dana, I look at this one of two ways, just logically. If I were sitting in a conference room in a U.S. Attorney's office with a supervisor, I would say, boss, here's the way I see it. Okay, you've got Roger Stone, and then you have Corsi on the one hand, with an ostensible possible link to, WikiLeaks, okay? And then you have an ostensible link between Stone and Corsi and the Trump campaign. But, boss, we haven't put those two sides together yet, and the only way we're going to prevail on some type of concrete theory that the Trump campaign worked specifically with the Russians to affect the election is if we can put that together, and we're not there yet. So everybody needs to calm down a little bit, Dana, everybody wildly theorizing. But again, in fairness, and working again off Judge Napolitano, at least now they seem to have a viable global concept and theory of WikiLeaks disseminating DNC emails that were hacked, Stone and Corsi possibly linked to them, and then a link on the reverse side to the Trump campaign. You're starting to get lukewarm, so to speak.
And then you had this report that was out of The Guardian that has not been corroborated by any other reporter, so they're not actually reporting it. So I think maybe we should take that with a bit of skepticism about Manafort going to visit Assange.
And I'm very glad you mentioned that real quick, because one thing I've learned in 33 years of doing this, every day I was a federal prosecutor, 9 years, been in a lot of witness interviews, is that the denials were very, very clear clear and unequivocal, okay, about how we never met with Assange. We had nothing to do with him, and those seem quite credible. So I think it leans slightly toward Mueller trying to finalize.
And maybe could
thing.
it be that Mueller finalizes, and what he finalizes is that there's a lot of people that were involved in this in some way that all lied, but we're not coming up with any sort of collusion that ties the president to it, and so there's our report. Is that?
No, I think
what we're
that's a
getting towards?
very good crystal ball prediction. I think that I've said this before. I'll say it again. It's interesting. You're going to see the reliance on, look, there are 2 DOJ memos that say you can't indict the president. That provides an immediate cover and an immediate segue. But by the way, there are a lot of things that went on that did appear to be somewhat, shady and so on. This connection, that connection, the cast of characters. But there's no indictable crime.
My last question to you is that it is a crime to lie to the FBI and to lie to Congress. I mean, there should be consequences for that.
It's a 5-year felony, 18 U.S.C. 1001.
Yeah, don't do that. It costs a lot of money to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
Right. All right. Doug Burns, love having you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Swift reaction on Capitol Hill after Michael Cohen admits he lied to a Senate committee. Senator John Kennedy is on deck with his reaction. And be sure to check out my podcast with Chris Stirewalt. It's called I'll Tell You What. It's available for download on iTunes or wherever you listen.
Ahead on President Trump, Michael Cohen, and Russia. The president's former fixer and lawyer admitted today that he lied to Congress over the Russia investigation. But the president says Michael Cohen is lying about lying. We'll hear from a former federal prosecutor about the possible political and legal problems from all of this when our reporting begins. Top of the hour.
Sharp reaction on Capitol Hill as Michael Cohen tells a federal judge he lied to Congress. This marks the first time he's been charged in connection to the Russia investigation. The president defending himself, saying he did nothing wrong.
Go back and look at the paper that Michael Cohen wrote before he testified in the House and/or Senate. It talked about his position, what he's trying to do, because he's a weak person and not a very smart person.
Louisiana Senator John Kennedy is a Republican on the Judiciary Committee, which invited Cohen to testify back in August. And, sir, I just wanted to get your opinion about how you feel about people that are witnesses to the committee or to Congress and then admitting later that they lied about it.
Well, you shouldn't lie to Congress, especially when you're under oath. It's a crime. Do people do it? Yes. Why do they continue to do it? Because they're not prosecuted. I don't have any sympathy for Mr. Cohen. I don't know the gentleman. I've watched him operate. He's always impressed me as the sort of person who would do the right thing only when constantly supervised and cornered like a rat. He's been cornered. He's admitted to doing it, and he ought to be prosecuted or at least punished.
Yeah, I know certainly the White House and a lot of Republicans would love to see this Manafort report wrap up, or the investigation wrap up. And do you think that, as these people have admitted to lying to Congress or lying to the FBI, that they've prolonged the report from getting done?
Well, of course. And I don't know what Mr. Cohen's plea means in the grand scheme of things. And I've listened to a lot of commentators talk about it, but frankly, it's just rank speculation.
Right.
This is one more log on the fire of speculation.
Yeah.
I wish Mr. Mueller would wrap this thing up. It's been, 17 months? I hope he makes his report public. If he doesn't, I'm going to raise all manner of hell. The American people need to know what the facts are. If somebody did something wrong, prosecute them, but let's get this behind
That might
us.
not be up to him, right? I mean, Mr. Mueller has to turn in his report to the Department of Justice. Are you calling on the Justice Department to release that report publicly when it is available?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me also ask you about something that we just found out about. Lindsey Graham saying just moments ago that he will be briefed by the CIA on the Khashoggi murder, likely next week. Graham went on to say it is up to other senators to ask for a briefing if they want one. Certainly, he was frustrated yesterday that he thought the CIA needed to be there. General Jack Keane, I thought he made a good point on our air yesterday that you might not want the CIA to brief 100 members of the Senate all at once, but individual briefings might be important. Will you be asking for one?
I will, and I think part of the concern, of course, as it always is leaks. This is classified information.
Right.
But look, here's what we need to do, in my opinion. Congress needs to figure out a way to condemn in the strongest possible terms what Saudi Arabia did without blowing up the Middle East. And if we're not smart enough to do that, then Congress isn't as smart as it thinks it is. What the Saudis did was unconscionable. I mean, they butchered this man like a hog, for God's sakes. And we need to condemn it. But we don't need to blow up the Middle East doing it.
Right.
And that to me is the issue. Who knew what when? We'll never know for sure. I have assumed all along that Prince Mohammed knew about it, gave the order, and probably the king did too. Do I know that for a fact? No, but I've made the assumption. And we've got to condemn it. But the Middle East is fragile. We have no relationship with Iran. We don't have much of a relationship with Turkey. Before we go blow up our entire relationship with Saudi Arabia, we ought to think it through.
One last question for you, sir. As the president heads to the G20, there's a lot on the agenda. One of those things is trying to figure out if there can be an agreement made with China, or at least an agreement in principle, to try to end the trade war. What would you like to see happen?
Well, of course I'd like to see us end the trade war. But let's face the facts. Number one, the only way to win a trade war is don't fight the thing. But to the extent that anyone can, I think we're winning this trade war with China. I wish we could wrap it up. But the problem is this. We let China become a member of the World Trade Organization on January 1, 2000. On January 2, China started cheating. And they've got to stop cheating. And that's in part what this is all about.
All right. Senator Kennedy, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
So the life expectancy of the average person here in the U.S., it's dropping. We're going to tell you why. Plus, outgoing Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, sharing his biggest regret from his time in Washington, and what one person is doing to help students in a California community leveled by recent firefighters. Anyone from seeing inside while agents complete their work. Officials have not yet commented on the nature of the raids or what they're seeking. Burke is also an attorney who has handled property tax cases for President Trump in the past. U.S. life expectancy drops for babies born in 2017. It's now at 78.6 years old. That's slightly down from 2016. Jonathan Seri is live in Atlanta to explain why this is changing and dropping.
Yeah, hi, Dana. Well, federal health officials say drug overdose and suicide are the major factors driving this disturbing trend. The CDC director issued a written statement saying, quote, life expectancy gives us a snapshot of the nation's overall health, and these sobering statistics are a wake-up call that we are losing too many Americans too early and too often to conditions that are preventable. In 2017, drug overdoses claimed more than 70,000 lives in the U.S. That's nearly a 10% increase over the previous year. And the suicide rate among working-age Americans increased 34% from 2000 to 2016. George Washington University public health professor William Dietz says the two trends stem from similar causes.
But I think in many parts of the country, there is a sense of hopelessness, that people are unemployed, they're not sure of their future, there's divisive politics, the income gap is widening.
The CDC looked at the occupations with the highest suicide rates. For men, those occupations are construction and extraction, arts and entertainment, and installation and repair. For women, arts and entertainment, protective service, and healthcare support top the list. Now, why are these lists important? Public health officials say that targeting suicide prevention efforts to high-risk occupations can help save lives. Employee assistance programs, workplace wellness programs, and online tools, including mental health screenings and education, can help. Federal health officials are also reminding Americans of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is available to anyone both online or by phone. That number is 1-800-273-8255 or 1-800-273-TALK. Dana, back to you.
Jonathan, if I could just ask you, is the CDC asking anything from the Trump administration for more help or resources?
I don't know the answer to that yet, but I know that many public Public health advocates are likely to ask for more assistance from the federal government, and backing it up with this study, many organizations that target suicide and drug prevention are likely to get both public and private assistance as a result, Dana.
All right, Jonathan Serry, thank you for the report. And now a look at other stories you should know about. It's our Daily 3. First up, U.S. Marshals arresting Aaron Brown. He's accused of opening fire in that Alabama mall Thanksgiving night, police shooting back, but killing the wrong man. He is now charged with attempted murder. Next, China ordering doctors to stop working on the world's first gene-edited babies. Government officials calling the team's actions illegal and unacceptable.